Okay. All right. So we're talking about Kierkegaard today, and we're really looking at two central ideas here. We're looking at, first of all, religion. Okay, we're going to define religion, and we're going to look at Kierkegaard's definition. What does it mean to be genuinely religious? Okay, and by contrast, that means you can also be kind of phony. You can be phony. You can be nominally religious, but not genuinely religious. For Kierkegaard, to be religious is a subjective choice. Okay, it's something that is at the core of your being, and it informs your sense of meaning in life, and informs your connection to what is higher than you. Okay, your sense of divinity. And even if you're an atheist, okay, and you don't want to talk about divinity, or you don't want to talk about God, we have to talk about the sort of the fundamental mystery of existence, that we are in this world, and this world has some say over us. It has power over us. It's going to dictate our life in a way that we cannot control. Okay, so how do you relate to this underlying unknown? Okay, so he's going to talk about. He said you have to be able to be comfortable with uncertainty. So his view on religion, that's what we're going to start with, and then we're going to talk about another text which is called The Present Age. It's a very short text. I believe I sent it to you guys. So in The Present Age, he's going to be talking about society. It's a critique of society. Okay, basically this prevailing theme that we're going to be understanding with existentialism is sort of the conflict. There's a conflict between society and the individual. Okay, the force of conformity and the individual. So that's what we're going to be talking about. So Kierkegaard, okay, Kierkegaard is a very important Danish philosopher. I guess there's one more point that I want to make here. He is a theistic existentialist. He's a Christian existentialist. We're going to look at some other philosophers in the coming weeks that are atheistic existentialists. Okay, Kierkegaard is one of the few theistic existentialists that we're going to see. So you see that sort of existentialism. You can ask, let's kind of define that very quickly here. We've already defined it a little bit in previous classes. But you can ask yourself, is existentialism a kind of a worldview? Is it a kind of a complete worldview onto itself? And you might say yes or no. But what we see with some philosophers like Kierkegaard is that what existentialism is sort of it's sort of an add-on to a worldview. So you can be an atheistic existentialist, or you can be a theistic existentialist, like Kierkegaard is. So what do we mean by existentialism? Okay, it's a kind of a term which itself is kind of strange and difficult to define. But what we're going to get with sort of Kierkegaard, who is one of the fathers of existentialism, is that if there's any meaning to be life, if there's any meaning to be found in life, it comes from the subjective living of it. Okay, so there's an emphasis on individuality, finding your own values, finding your own meaning. If there's any meaning to be found, it comes from your subjective experience. Okay, so Kierkegaard's going to say that. He says the purpose of your life is not going to be discovered objectively. It's not given to you by science or some objective source. It stems from that inner experience, that subjective experience. And how do you relate the subjective experience to the broader cosmos, or to God, or your sense of divinity, or the Tao, or whatever you want to call it? All right. Let me make this point now. It's a point I want to make later on, but let me make it now, because it also helps us understand sort of existentialism. What is Kierkegaard responding to? What he's responding to is a very important philosophy, or a philosopher whose name is Hegel. Okay, and this is what Hegel said. I'm trying to give you a very short definition of what Hegel said, and then you'll see how Kierkegaard is reacting to this. What Hegel says is basically very important German philosopher. What Hegel says is basically the individual doesn't matter. That what the individual is sort of a droplet in an ocean, is a droplet in a large tidal wave, that we are basically the product and the byproduct of forces, historical forces, societal forces, universal forces that are much greater than ourselves. And we are just basically puppets on the stage of a given time, or a given epoch, or a given moment in history. And basically there's this sort of, there's this process of sort of evolution, which is taking place, all these great waves, okay, and ups and downs, okay, these ups and downs of these kind of great forces of history, and we're just basically, the sort of the building blocks of these great movements. This great sort of the universe is sort of evolving, and it evolves through these kind of waves, in and out, and we're just kind of caught up in this. Okay, so the individual, to say it very simply, the individual does not matter. The individual is just a certain kind of byproduct of these forces which define him, and which he is in some sense limited by, and that's it. Okay, that like the force is greater than the individual. The individual doesn't really matter. So Kierkegaard is reacting to that, and what Kierkegaard is going to say is, no, my life matters. Okay, my life matters for no other reason than that it matters for me. Okay, that I feel things as being important and beautiful and meaningful. So Kierkegaard is going to say, I'm not going to accept this thesis that my individuality is just a kind of a trivial accident. Okay, my subjective experience matters, and if there's any meaning to be found in life, it's going to happen here. Okay, it happens in my life, in my subjective experience. Okay, just keep that in mind. All right, so I guess I'll start with the religious bit. And also here you see the kind of existentialist idea. The thing is to understand myself, to see what God really wishes me to do. The thing is to find a truth which is true for me, to find an idea for which I can live and die. So again, it's sort of this surrendering to this force which is greater than yourself. Okay, Kierkegaard, that's very important for Kierkegaard, that there is something that is greater than yourself, is greater than your life, which informs you, okay, which relates to you on a personal level, okay, which gives you a sense of meaning, it gives you a sense of passion, it gives you a sense of vitality, it makes you alive. Okay, for Kierkegaard, with like many other philosophers we're going to see, there's a difference between being alive and feeling alive. Okay, so there's this thing which is greater than yourself, which informs you, and you see that in some sense it doesn't reveal itself to you. It is a kind of a mystery. There's a kind of element of uncertainty that you have to be comfortable with. So you say, well, how can you be that came up in another classes, how can you be sort of an existentialist if God already has a plan for you, if you are in some sense fated and you have faith in this thing which is greater than yourself? Well, the point is, God does not reveal that to you. You have to figure out what that is for yourself subjectively as your life goes on. You're not born with a blueprint. You're not born with an instruction manual. Okay, but you're born with a kind of there's a paradox there. There's a paradox with, you're born with faith. Faith is a kind of, there's a kind of security there. There's an assurance, okay? There's a willingness, but there's also the uncertainty, which is, God is not going to give you a handwritten letter, okay? You have to find this truth that is true for you. You have to find it for yourself. But now, also very important is, this does not mean that that everything is your truth. Don't make that mistake. That is not to say that truth is therefore only subjective. There are things that are objectively true, but there are some things that are also subjectively true, and those things are very important. But don't make the mistake of saying therefore it is all subjective and it is all relativistic, and truth is just what is true for me. That might end up getting you in trouble as well. Okay. So let's proceed here. Let's define, again, if you have any questions or comments, just jump right in and cut me off. Unmute yourselves and speak up. Otherwise, use the chat. The chat is a little bit more difficult to access sometimes. So religion, let's define this term. Now I'm giving you a kind of, this is not his definition. I'm going to give you a sort of academic definition of religion. Religion comes from the Latin word religio, okay, or the verb relegar, which is to bind. You're tying together. Okay, what are you tying together? And you're tying together really two or three things. And the first one here is what really matters to Kierkegaard. You're tying together your experience with your sense of the divine. Okay, if you want to, if you're a secular or atheistic, you don't like using words like divine. It's tying your experience of the world to the underlying mystery of existence, okay, which is greater than you, which informs your life, and which is going to have a big bearing on where your life is going to go. So that relationship, okay, you're tying yourself to your sense of that which is greater, okay, metaphysical, or that which is divine. Religion is a relationship between the religious devotee and that which is the object of religious devotion, whether it be the gods or God or the Tao or the Holy Spirit, binding together, okay? So we'll talk about that in a second. What it also binds you together is you to a community of people of a similar faith, okay, what you would call the religious collective. So you can talk about Christianity, and this is a very important distinction. For Kierkegaard, you could talk about Christianity, and you could talk about Christendom. Okay, Christianity is the belief system, or is the faith, and for Kierkegaard, Christianity is truly a subjective thing. Christianity is not something that happens publicly or collectively. Christianity is something that happens inside of you. Okay, and you can say that for any religion. The definition still holds. Let me come back to that point in a second. And then you can talk about Christendom, which is the institution, the instantiation, the public instantiation, or the institution, which is the kind of the societal enterprise. And what Kierkegaard is going to say is, you can get distracted by the community, and the community can actually make you lose touch with God, because God is something that you have a personal connection to. All right. Basically, let me try to put that very simply. You have people that are genuinely religious, and there are some people that are some kind of disingenuously religious. They're kind of phony religious, or that you would call normatively religious. That is to say, they say, I'm Christian because I'm Christian. I'm Christian because I was baptized when I wasn't even conscious as a baby. I'm Christian because I was born into a largely Christian culture, and you can say that about anything. You say, I'm Muslim because I was born into a Muslim country. Kierkegaard would say that's missing the point. And what you see with these individuals is they are religious more, not really as a kind of a philosophical or as a subjective informing idea. They're religious in a kind of what's the word I'm looking for? In a really kind of communal way. So they are basically, what you see is they are religious only when they are surrounded by people within that community with judging eyes. Okay, I know people like that. Like I know Muslims that when they're with their community, they behave according to the normative practices. They pray, they eat halal, and so on. And when they're not under the watchful guise of that community, they don't care, So Kierkegaard would say you're not genuinely religious. You're religious as a kind of consequence of or conditional to the group. Your definition as Muslim or Christian or whatever else is really is a group membership. It's group membership, all right. And Kierkegaard says you can get lost in that. So that's kind of the first point. Let me say this, and then we'll continue. When we talk about Simone de Beauvoir in a few weeks, Simone de Beauvoir has this quote. Now, I want to use the form of the quote. Now, and we need to swap out the words. But let's not get into this quote too much, but let's just use the form. The quote is this. She says, one is not born a woman, one becomes a woman. Okay, we'll consider that after. But we can take the form of that quote and apply it here. What Kierkegaard would say, he didn't say it, but he would basically say it, is one is not born a Christian, one becomes a Christian. Okay, and you can say that for anything else. One is not born a Muslim, one becomes a Muslim. Okay, and it becomes a Muslim when you feel it as being a source of direction in your life, and it's a choice. For Kierkegaard, it's a choice. Now, there are a lot of, let's say Christians, a lot of Christians in the United States, that you listen to these so-called Christians, and they say, yeah, I'm a Christian, and they strongly identify as being Christian. But when you listen to what they have to say, you have to conclude there's really nothing Christian about you. Okay, You want to imprison people and you want to kill people and you're for, you know, capital punishment. Doesn't really sound like there's much Christian about you. Okay, you're more of a, if you actually read the lines, it sounds like you're more of a Satanist than a Christian. Okay, but their Christianity is basically a group membership. All right. Let me give you just one more sort of example. There was Alan Watts. I'd heard a lecture by Alan Watts one time. It was a while ago, and he was basically saying that when he grew up in the Anglican Church in England, it was basically like that. You would go to church, and Sunday school would basically be just sort of being introduced to the hierarchical societal structure of the Anglican Church. You know, the institutions and the ranks, and you know the bureaucratic operations of the Anglican Church. And he found it kind of boring. He said, there's no meaning for me here. It doesn't really mean anything to me, okay? It's kind of meaningless. It's kind of devoid of theology. It's devoid of philosophy. It's devoid of any metaphysical, interesting ideas. And then his mother, basically, who was a librarian, if I'm not mistaken, brought him some books on Buddhism. And that's not to say that Buddhism necessarily has something that Christianity does not. But in the books on Buddhism, he was finally exposed to sort of the metaphysical, or, you know, this spiritual dimension, which unfortunately in his Christian culture was not the emphasis. The emphasis was on basically the mechanics, okay? You know, this is when you stand, this is when you kneel, this is when you sit, this is when you go like 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 this, you know. So maybe, you know, I would suspect, you know, if you were to do a survey here, probably more than almost half of you would identify as sort of being, you know, secular or agnostic or straight up atheistic, and a good chunk of you would identify as being religious. So, you know, I guess this question can apply to all of us, but more specifically to the religious people. You can ask yourself, does this ring a bell? Does this make sense to you? Are you in agreement with what Kierkegaard is saying so far? This idea of being genuine or being sort of phony, okay? That's an important point. It's kind of this idea of being phony. You are living for other people. You are putting on a facade, okay? The facade is there. You appear to be a certain way, but truly, what's going on subjectively is only you know, okay? Whether you actually believe or not, whether this actually has meaning for you or not, okay? So what Kierkegaard is going to say is the religious connection to your sense of divinity, that's where it truly happens, okay? If there is a community at all, it's simply accidental, and in some cases the community itself can be a distraction from your relationship to God. But what are we tying together here, specifically in this first sense? Just to give you an idea, we're tying our experience of this life to a sense of this life that we can somehow fathom. We can imagine it, okay? We are the here and now when we are human, and we can imagine what is beyond and what is superhuman, okay? Whether it be in the form of sort of you know, Jesus or Buddha or a prophet or a Messiah. This is what we call the profane, okay? The gross material existence. You're born and you die. And yet there's something about this universe, something about this existence, something about this creation, which is beyond that, which transcends it, okay? We are immanent, and there's something about this world which is transcendent, which is not subject to time, okay, in a way. We are finite and temporal, and yet we can imagine, you know, even if you're kind of a secular materialist, you might be sort of blown away at the thought of, you know, the eternal universe, or the infinite universe, or the indefinite universe, sort of is something that transcends our daily experience, okay? We are mutable and transient, and there is something about this life, something about this world, something about divinity, if you want to use that word, which is immutable and permanent. And we are contingent. In other words, we could have just as easily not been born. We could have just as easily not been here. And there's something about existence which is necessary, okay? We also made this distinction, which is understanding something from the outside as a kind of a spectator, and understanding something from the inside. And we made that distinction. So we said, you know, knowing all the objective facts does not, it gives you a certain degree of understanding, but there is also a different form of understanding, which is the subjective experience of hands-on. So I gave you that example last class, at the end of last classes. You can know everything there is to know objectively about Buddhism, but there still remains the question of, what does it feel like to be a Buddhist? What is the experience of Buddhism? Okay, just keep that in mind. So a religion is a worldview. It gives us a metaphysics, a vision of reality, a cosmology, a question to the origins of things. Yeah, a sense of supreme reality, what some religious scholars call ultimate reality. What is ultimate reality? Okay, I like that formulation, ultimate reality. What is human? What is human nature? What is human existence? What is the human condition? Where did it come from? Where is it going? What possibilities are open to us? And because we have to deal with something, we have to deal with feelings of sort of insufficiency, guilt, meaninglessness, death, alienation, search for meaning, mortality, immorality. These are things that we face as a human condition. So this worldview, or sometimes these great world religions, can give us a solution to this. It gives us a sense of doctrine, morality, ethics, rituals, certain normative practices. Like, what do you do when somebody dies? How do you go about disposing of the body? What's the burial ritual? Okay, so now let's get into this. Kierkegaard, I already gave you a few introductory points. Okay, early existentialist, regarded as a philosopher, theologist, social critic. So okay, let me talk about these three stages here. What he calls the three stages of life. This I do not want you to retain. I'll tell you what I want you to retain. I want you to retain what I'll talk about next. But let me just go through this. These three stages of life. He says at the lowest, the first stage is what he calls the aesthetic stage. Okay, the aesthetic stage is basically, as we touched upon right at the beginning of class, just living just for the moment, living just for pleasure, immediate kind of sense gratification. And you're always pursuing desires. You're always satisfying appetites, but there is no lasting meaning. Okay. What he calls the ethical stage is, for me, the way I understand it, I might be a little bit off here, but the way I understand what he means by the ethical stage is, we are governed by this idea of sort of laws, and we are governed by our intellect. And what we really seek is a sense of assurance. We want certainty, okay? So this very intellectual mind, the very intellectual approach to sort of your outlook on the world, very scientific, okay? Things have to be sort of known and clear cut and decisive, like confidence in the sense that I'm not gonna act upon them unless I can be sure. And he says, finally, the religious stage. The religious stage is, again, I think that you don't necessarily have to be religious to get to this religious stage. The religious stage is, in some sense, the acknowledgement of what we were touching upon a little bit earlier, the acknowledgement of an underlying mystery, and this not appreciate, but this comfort for uncertainty, that there is something about this life which is greater than you, okay, which is going to have a say even in the direction and the course of your life. You're not the only, basically, you are an actor on the stage. You are a creative element of this life, but this life is greater than just your narrative, okay? And sometimes life has a way of throwing you a curveball and so on. So the aesthetic stage is basically living just for pleasure. And there is no lasting meaning, because you're always just, satisfaction, and then the desire returns, or another desire. You satisfy one desire, and it's kind of this constant pursuit. It's a pursuit. The ethical stage is you are trying to make sense of this world. I use the word intellectually here, but there's a kind of a grasping. You are, and we'll talk about that next class as well with Nietzsche. This is probably where you would put what Nietzsche calls the rational man. You have a kind of a system, and you feel sheltered under that system, and you don't want to acknowledge that that system is in part your own creation. Okay, and finally, the religious stage is it's a kind of a surrender, in a way, that you admit that, look, I have faith that there is this thing which is greater than myself. All right, so let's kind of unpack that just a little bit further. Okay, let me just skip over this. Actually, this is one that I wanted to mention. Okay, we touched upon this earlier. Okay, for Kierkegaard, there's a difference between existence and truly existing. There's a difference between being alive and having a life. Okay, there's a difference. So he sees that you can only truly be alive when you enter this religious stage. The religious stage, he uses a word which is the leap of faith. Okay, you have to throw yourself, okay, passionately and lovingly into something, but without knowing where you're going to land. Life requires that. It requires, to truly be alive, requires that at one point you are going to launch yourself into something just by enthusiasm, without having that intellectual certainty of where you're going to end up. Okay, and it's something that which is greater than just the satisfaction of, you know, mere bodily appetites and animalistic pleasures. Okay, so you get the point here. This kind of personal commitment, throwing yourself into something, okay, and living it kind of subjectively, okay. So let's get to the point. With regards to pleasure, this is what he says. He says, most people pursue pleasure with such breathless haste that they hurry past it. So that's funny, okay. That means that even those people that do live at the aesthetic stage and they're concerned with pleasure, they're at least take the time, sure, if that's the life that you want to live, at least take the time to enjoy the pleasure. You know what I mean? Enjoy the food that you eat. Enjoy, you know, the fragrances that you wear. Enjoy the clothing that you put on. Enjoy these sensory things. But take the time to actually have the subjective experience of them. Okay? Very often we will satisfy our appetites and it won't even sort of register into consciousness. We don't even have the subjective experience. We just kind of plow right through it. Okay, so that's kind of ironic in a way. Okay, so the aesthetic stage, you know, the ethical stage, and finally, you know, the religious stage. I'm skipping over that very quickly, but I want to get to the point here. So he says, what he calls the leap of faith is throwing yourself into something without knowing necessarily where you're going to end up. Is in some sense, to some degree, required in life. The suspension of the rational. Okay, now I'm not comfortable saying that because, you know, in the other classes I teach, you know, logic and argumentation and critical thinking and all that stuff. But in a broader picture, okay, if we're not dealing with scientific matters of fact, when we're dealing with the subjective nitty-gritty of our life, Kierkegaard is right. There are some moments where you have to you're not going to get the answer. You're not going to have the optimal solution. You just have to throw yourself into it. Okay, the suspension of the rational. What he calls the teleological suspension of the ethical. It's kind of not comfortable. It's not really comfortable, you know, to say that there are some things that you just have to kind of blindly launch yourself into without certainty. Is something that is very dangerous, and that faith is very dangerous. Faith is, you know, basically blind trust. But life requires that you have, whether you're religious or not, that you have some faith, that you have to trust life, okay, for all the ups and downs, for all the good and the bad, for all the, you have to, it is what it is, okay, and it's greater than you. Life is greater than any one of us, okay. So this is the example that he uses. He uses the example of Abraham. Some of you guys know the story of Abraham. Abraham is basically asked by God to sacrifice his son Isaac. Now, this is what Kierkegaard is going to say. He says, Abraham really understands, because as soon as his God asks him to sacrifice his son, he's ready to do it, okay? There's no hesitation, okay? He doesn't go to the sort of ethic, he doesn't go to the aesthetic stage, and he doesn't say, no, I don't want to do it because it's going to be uncomfortable. There's a lot of things that you have to do in this life which are nonetheless uncomfortable, okay? Which they're uncomfortable in the moment, but provide us with much deeper meaning in the long run. So Abraham doesn't say, I'm not going to do it because it's uncomfortable. So he's not at the aesthetic stage. He's not at the ethical stage. He doesn't say, okay, God, I will do it. I will do it, but please tell me why. I want to understand, okay? I want to understand why you require me to sacrifice my son. He doesn't do that either. he just goes straight to this kind of this faith, okay, leap of faith. He just says, okay, I'll do it, okay, and then God says, no, 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 I'm just kidding. But there, for whatever else you can say about that, and however dangerous that might be, Kierkegaard wants us to appreciate that there's a power there, okay? There's a power of sort of devotion and dedication and passion. And you have to agree with him, even though it might be dangerous. There is a power in what Abraham did, okay? So this idea of suspension of the kind of the rational in some cases, in some moments in life, you have to throw yourself. You have to throw yourself into it, okay? To dare is to lose one's footing momentarily. To not dare is to lose oneself, okay? So where we are and where we want to be, you don't know, You say, well, I'm not going to apply to this university unless I know I can get in. I'm not going to apply to this job unless I know I can get an interview. I'm not going to ask this girl out on a date unless I know she's going to say yes, because I don't want to be embarrassed and so on. At one point, you have to just, push the eject button and just go. You have to jump off the cliff. That's the leap of faith. Leap of faith is you don't know where you're going to land, but you trust something greater than yourself that, you know what, maybe it's going to be okay. It's not necessarily going to be okay, but maybe it will be okay. And the point is, some people have my 5-year plan, my 10-year plan. Good. You want to be organized. You want to have a plan. Good. But, good luck with that 5-year plan, that 10-year plan, because life is going to take you, up and down and around and around. Okay. Life is like a roller coaster. You should definitely have some direction. But that's the point, is you have to have something which is a kind of a beacon, something which is beyond you, which invites you, and you have to accept that invitation. Okay. Any questions, comments? Just jump right in. Okay, so now let's get into this part that I want you to retain. Let me see how I'm doing on time. Okay, not bad. Let me see what time here. 9:30. Okay, we'll be done. I have to wrap this up in about 25 minutes. All right. So 2 things here. Let me go through this part very quickly. So again, what are the obstacles to being genuinely religious? For the first one, one of them we already touched upon, which is the confusion of the establishment with religion. Okay, religion for Kierkegaard is something that is a choice. It's a subjective choice. It's something that you feel in your core. You know whether you're genuinely religious or not. Okay, but you can get caught up in sort of the establishment, the practices, and that for some people may end up being a distraction. All right. So we touched upon that. The other one that he wants to touch upon, and there's an important point that I want to make, is this is not something that is rooted, your faith is not something that can be rooted objectively or scientifically. He says, if you want to try to root your faith objectively or scientifically, you're going to miss the point. So let me try to sort of unpack that. Let me start with an example, actually. He says, let me just read this passage. He says, to Christianity, which one tries to establish objectively and scientifically, instead of approaching the problem as it should be approached, above ground, that is to say, subjectively. So what he's going to say is basically this: there is no amount of objective facts that you can give to a believer that's going to make the believer into a non-believer, and there's no amount of objective facts that's going to make a non-believer into a believer. So that is to say that religious belief, something that is so, it's outside the scope of science, is a subjective choice. And that's how it's supposed to be understood. And because it's a subjective choice, there's always that uncertainty. So he says uncertainty, where does he say it? He says, whereas faith has uncertainty as a useful teacher, it now finds that certainty is its most dangerous enemy. Okay? Take passion away and faith disappears, for certainty and passion are incompatible. That's interesting. Okay? That's I'm not sure if I fully agree with that, but it's interesting. So let me try to give you an example. Let me see which example comes to mind here. This idea that, well, if somehow we find a relic that corroborates the story of the Bible, then we're going to be able to convert people to the Bible. And vice versa. So you have people that are kind of scouring, Google Earth looking for remnants of Noah's Ark, what you would call, pseudo-archaeologists. And they say, once we find Noah's Ark, that we're going to have objectively proven some story in the Bible, and then we can bring this to people and show people, and we're going to convert them. We're going to make non-believers into believers. We're going to turn atheists into, good Christians, which is absurd. That's not how it works. Okay. So it's Kierkegaard is saying, if you try to root your belief in objective facts, you're sort of missing the point. Let me give you another example. Is suppose, let's say you take the Shroud of Turin. The Shroud of Turin was this cloth which had supposedly Jesus's face imprinted on it, because it comes from the biblical story when Jesus was carrying the cross. The woman wiped his face, and his face was there. So this was something that was discovered in the Renaissance, and this idea was, well, okay, now we have proof that Jesus existed, so now we should all be believers. But the point is, it shouldn't change anything. If it does change something, then Kierkegaard says you haven't understood what it truly means to be religious. The point is, if you truly understand what it means to be religious, it doesn't change anything. It's not augmented or diminished by facts. And actually, the Shroud of Turin was carbon dated, and it was discovered to be an elaborate Renaissance hoax. So, I had a Jehovah's Witness come to the house a few months ago, and he was trying to give me this. He's trying to convince me that the Bible is credible because the Bible contains within it an explanation of the theory of evolution. And I'm like, but this is not the point. It's not the point that the Bible is supposed to be, an astronomy textbook or a biology textbook. It's not. The Bible for Kierkegaard is almost supposed to affect you more like art than scientific literature. It's not about facts, okay? Or if a geologist says that, oh yeah, Moses crossed the Red Sea. He was able to cross the Red Sea because at that particular moment in history, the Red Sea would, in certain areas, drop to a level where it was traversable on foot, or that's not the point. Who cares? So let me try to make the point very simply. Point number one, with regards to the kind of community, what Kierkegaard would say is, if there's no other Christians alive on earth and you are the only Christian, Christianity is alive in you, okay? Because it's felt subjectively. That's point number one. Point number two, and now maybe I'm stretching a little bit, but let's kind of stretch it all the way. And I think maybe Kierkegaard would agree that even if Jesus was not a real historical character, even if Jesus never really existed, doesn't matter, okay? Because it's not about facts. It's about what it symbolizes and how it informs my life. It could very well be a piece of fiction. It doesn't matter. Okay, it means something for me, and that's all. That's all. There are some truths which are subjective. So even if Jesus never existed, it's still meaningful for me. Okay. So let me get just one more quote here, and then I want to make a point, and then we'll jump into the present age, and I have to fly through the presentation in about 20 minutes, which is okay. So he says this. He said, let me just kind of give you the synapse here. He says, you can go to church on Sunday, a real church, but you can pray in a false spirit, and therefore you're disingenuous. Or you can be in an idolatrous foreign land, and you can make yourself your own little altar from pebbles and sticks. And if you pray with sincerity and total passion of the infinite, then he says you have there's more religion in you praying on a little altar made of stones on the top of a mountain than there might be with a bunch of phony Catholics in a church. So again, you can ask yourself whether or not you can relate to this or not. I can relate to this. Okay, I know a lot of people are nominally religious, but it doesn't inform them. It doesn't inform their life truly subjectively. Okay. So this is a point that I want to make. This is a very important point, and this is a point that we're going to touch upon next class with Nietzsche. Is what role does the intellect play in augmenting or diminishing the subjective experience that you can have? That's a complicated question. Let me unpack that. Okay, what I mean to say is this: is sometimes knowing more about something, it enables you to get more out of the experience. That's true, you know what I mean? Like you can go to the Eiffel Tower and like so many thousands of tourists in any given week, you're there and you take your selfie with the Eiffel Tower because that's what people do and that's what you're going to do, and you take your selfie with the Eiffel Tower and you leave. But you have no knowledge about, you know, the architect or the design or when it was made or what it was used for. So it's kind of, it's lost on you. Whereas somebody who does have the factual, the intellectual knowledge can appreciate something. The subjective experience is augmented. Like if you go into a museum, your degree of knowledge and culture can augment your experience. You can see things that an ignorant person is blind to. Okay, that's one part. But there's the other part, and this is the part that I want to kind of unpack a little bit, which is sometimes knowing too much can also be blinding in a way, because then all you see is the knowledge that you have. All you see is the acquired facts, and that ends up being all you see, and you're basically, your experience becomes limited by the objective facts. Okay, so in that case, your experience is sort of diminished by intellectual, you know, how the brain functions, just like conceptualizing, articulating, linguistically coding. So let me try to give you this example. It's suppose this, okay, we've all seen this. Now I'm going to make the point that you're looking at this, but you don't really see it, okay? And part of the reason why you don't see it is because you already have a concept of it. So let me try to give you the point. Is suppose you are, you know, an art historian living in Rome. You know everything that there is to know about this ceiling fresco of Michelangelo, and that in part augments your experience, okay? You can have a much deeper connection with this because of what you know about it. But this is my point. Now, this is relating to the second bit, is some days you walk into the Sistine Chapel, and what you wish is that you had never known anything about it, so that it hits you with the kind of the same subjective magnitude as when you first saw it. Okay, sort of that blind experience, that sort of unconditioned blind experience, that some days what you wish but what you cannot get is precisely the experience of when you first saw it, so that it can hit you with the full emotional subjective magnitude. Okay, let me give you two more examples of that. There's you know, I have that with, let's say, some movies. There's some movies that I absolutely love, you know, and I wish I can just get a stroke of amnesia in just the right place in my brain, that I completely forget the movie, so that I can watch it again and be hit with the full magnitude from like the first time I watch it. It's not going to be like the first time I watch it because I'm a different person. Okay, it'll be 7 years later, but it'll still be wow. You know, it's like when you know something too well, your familiarity, you know, undermines in some sense the subjective experience. Let me give you two more examples very quickly. Is Francis Ford Coppola, who directed The Godfather, basically said that about his film. He said, I can't watch the film because when I watch the film, all I see, all that comes to my mind is all the subjective, you know, all the objective technicalities that were going on in the production of the film. What was going on technically with this scene and this actor, and what was going on with my family at the time. So he can't see the story because any given scene will just basically bring to his mind a bunch of memories, which overloads his focus, and he you know, he can't pay attention. One more example is, I don't want to, okay, let me not go into the details of this example, but some musicians have that. Some musicians, let's say you're making a song. Sometimes the first time you make that song is like, wow, there's music there. It was creative. It was spontaneous. Okay. It was, it was alive. It was happening. It was a happening. And we were experiencing it. But then, you know, if you're recording the song and now you're recording it for the 10th time, when you're playing it for the 10th time or the 15th time, it starts to become mechanical. Okay. And then you start to lose that subjective charm, okay, because it becomes familiar. You start to know it intellectually, and you start to lose the power, the magic. Okay. Okay, one more point here, and then we have to get into the present age. I'll try to do this. I'm gonna keep you, okay? So just give me 20 minutes. So the quick story. This is we went to a wedding, a friend's wedding in Quebec City. Now, some of you guys are familiar with La Révolution Tranquille in Quebec. Quebec used to be a super religious place. And now it's not very religious anymore. And if you drive through any rural village in Quebec, you have massive churches like nowhere else in North America. Okay, it was extremely religious here. And then you had La Révolution Tranquille, so there was kind of a, sort of anger towards the religious establishment, which they felt was being oppressive, and towards Anglophone business community and so on. Okay, so I was at this wedding in Quebec. And at the reception, the priest was there. And I asked the priest, and he knew where I was going. I said, is it true that Mass used to be given in Latin? And then I asked the question, and what happened when they stopped giving it in Latin? So he says, yeah, it was true, okay? We would give the Mass in Latin, and we would have our backs turned to the churchgoers. And he says, then in 1964, the Roman Catholic Church decided that they would have la vulgarisation de la messe. So the Mass would be given in the language of the country that it was given. All right. And he said, well, what happened? He said, well, he knew exactly where I was going. We're on the same page. He said, well, what happened was when we turned around and we started speaking in French and we started looking at them in the eyes, they sort of lost interest. That there was a sort of magic, there was a certain mystery that circumvented the intellect when we were speaking a language that they didn't understand. Speaking in Latin. Imagine you're a rural farmer in Quebec. You go to church on Sundays, and this guy is standing with his back to you, facing the crucifix and the altar, speaking in Latin, which is a language you don't understand. Okay, it's like attending, classical music. It's like Pater noster, que est in celis, sanctificato nomen tuum, dabi nobis hoi panem quotidianum, et debeti boribus nostros, fiat voluntas tua, sicut in celis et in terra. And you're there for an hour. It blows you away. You don't know what to, it's like, so he says, when we started speaking in French, they stopped coming because they started understanding. So there's that magic, okay, in the not knowing, that desire to know and to conceptualize everything would be more of what he calls, the ethical stage, the intellectual mind, seeking certainty. Okay. Now let's transition. Talk about now the present age. Now we're talking about society. And there is that element that we touched upon with religion. You can be diluted by society. The religious community can make you lose touch with the reality of what you're talking about. So same thing in the broader society. He talks about basically this text, the present age. And he's sort of giving a critique of his experience of living in Copenhagen. I believe it was, at the end of the, what was it, late 1800s or something like that. And basically people are kind of vain. People are petty. People are interested in gossip. People are overly obsessed with what people think about them. So we can ask ourselves, well, to what degree is that true today when we talk about social media and so on, and obsession with self-image and obsession with recognition? So again, the problem of conformity. So let's get into it, okay? This idea of the flock, sheep, that human beings, we are conformists. So there's something about us which is kind of very sheep-like. It's not inherently a bad thing, but it could be a bad thing, especially, for Kierkegaard, who is interested in the individual, being individually authentic you, finding what is meaningful for you. Society can be a problem for that. Because why? Okay, because look, there are some truths which exist independent of society. They're there whether there are people or not. Those things are still true. There are some things that are true not because they're independent of society, but they are dependent on society. They're sort of make-believe games that we all play. Now you have to basically, you have to look at those carefully, because you have to ask these make-believe social constructs that we all play into. They are not independently real, but we make them real. Is this game worth playing? Is this a game that I actually want to participate in? Is this a game that is meaningful for me, or is this game just kind of a waste of time? And there are all kinds of stupid games that people play. Societal, norms and ideas and standards of success, and this is what it means to be successful, American dream, and this and that. Consider money. Okay, this is something that we're going to talk about a little bit with Nietzsche. And I might have given you this example in a previous class, but let's say money doesn't exist in reality. Money, money has no intrinsic value. Money only has value insofar as it can be exchanged for something else. So the value of money resides in the communal trust in that money. So in other words, money is not objectively real, But then you say, oh, it's not objectively real, therefore I'm not going to care about it. I don't care about money. Well, good luck. But just because it's not objective, just because it's not objectively real, doesn't mean it doesn't have a reality. If you don't care about money and you don't take money seriously, it's gonna have real world consequences. So there are real world consequences to societally constructed ideas. Okay, and then you have to ask yourself, well, which games do I want to play and which games do I not want to play? Okay, so this kind of the sheep, okay, what Nietzsche calls the herd mentality. We have there's a comfort in conforming. We all want to, there's a kind of a gravitational mass, okay? We all sort of gravitate towards. We circle in and about and around the flock. And now this is what Kierkegaard is going to say. He says, we can think that, you can imagine any given sheep is walking around all day long, and at the end of the day, the sheep says, wow, we really must have gotten far, eh? We really must have covered a lot of distance, because look at all the steps we took. But what might be the case is that you've basically just been circling around and around and in and about, and you really haven't, as a flock, progressed in any given direction. You haven't moved on to any greener pastures, but you've really given yourself the idea, the illusion that, wow, we really did a lot of work today. Look how much we moved, okay? But you haven't moved relative to anything objectively. You've moved relative to everybody else's movement, okay? So that's a kind of, there's a quote from Omar Bradley. This ties into a little bit of the, Plato's cave. We're all in Plato's cave. We're all in the same prison, and we all encourage, involvement and participation in the prison games, because that's what matters. Okay, and if you sort of deviate and you start to leave the prison, you may be met with resistance and hostility. So we'll talk about that in a second. So that quote from Omar Bradley basically says, do not set your course by the star. Do not set your course. He said, sorry, set your course by the stars, not by the light of every passing ship. Set your course by the stars, not by the light of every passing ship. So what does that mean? So you're talking about navigation at sea there, but there's a deeper analogy, which is basically the stars are some objective direction. It's a fixed point. It doesn't waver. Okay. You're moving, you're progressing, you're moving forward towards in a specific direction, as opposed to the light of every passing ship, which is basically just societal opinion, okay, popular opinion. And now again, if everybody follows the light of every passing ship, then ça tourne en rond, ça tourne en rond, ça tourne en rond, and everybody's just following, well, what's fashionable, what's the hype, what's trending, okay? And now this is the tragedy. The tragedy is that if a lot of ships congregate together, then they make all of them together make a very, very bright light. And then at that point, it might be tempting to say, well, there are no stars, and you laugh at anybody that talks about the stars. You say, well, can you see any stars? No, you don't see the stars because you're blinded by the light of this congregation of lights. And then you conclude, therefore, there are no stars. There is no truth. There is no progress to be made. And we are it. We are the shit. We are the end of evolution, okay? And you laugh at all previous generations. I laugh at all previous generations. Okay. So let's get into this, okay? So the problem of conformity, I'm going to skip over this. If you're interested in the psychology of conformity, I encourage you to look up Asch's conformity experiment. Quote from Nietzsche, okay? Again, the individuality is an important theme in existentialism. It's going to be a recurring theme. So independence, okay? The individual has always had to struggle to keep from being overwhelmed by the tribe. If you try it, you will be lonely often and sometimes frightened. But no price is too high to pay for the privilege of owning yourself. Yeah, you agree or disagree. And that's also like an assumption. There's an assumption there that that's even a possibility in sort of the existentialist framework. When we talk about individualism and collectivism later on, we're going to entertain the contrary assumption that maybe there is no possibility of being an individual at all. But from an existentialist framework, it is sort of an ingrained assumption that here we are, we're living these lives, and we live these lives as individuals, okay? Let me skip over this as well, okay? Again, most of what people do is just what most people do. So you drink out of bottled water even though you don't have to. We eat meat 3 times a day in North America blindly, and we feel entitled to, and we feel like it's not a bad thing for ourselves or for animal welfare or the environment, because That's what people do. So if that's what people do, it can't be that bad. If you look at a lot of ethical issues that we're facing, the ethical issues that we're facing, especially environmental issues, are not the result of, some evil bastard out there. And if we get rid of the evil bastard, then it's like a Disney movie, there's a kind of a white light that comes back to the kingdom and reestablishes harmony. A lot of the damage that is done is not by the evil bastard, but is done by widespread conformist ignorance and conformity to patterns of behavior that are meaningless. Okay, and they're not even meaningless to us. Okay, we continue doing more and more of the same, which is not even beneficial. So which games do you want to play? Okay, when is it meaningful to conform and be a part of a society? And when do you want to say, no, you know what, I'm not going to buy this ticket? Okay, let me skip over this. So now, what's the meaning of life here? What are we supposed to be doing? And here he's gonna have a laugh. He's being very sarcastic here. Okay, he said he's kind of laughing at the sort of standardized recipe for success and happiness. He said, really? Is that what happiness is? Is happiness basically, okay, let me work at a job that I don't really care about and I'm not passionate about. So, and then, let me get married because that's what's expected from my family. Let me have a few kids and a dog, and let me buy a house that I can't afford. That's going to take me, 40 years to pay off. And then by that time I'll have reached my retirement and I'm going to retire, and it's going to be an uneventful event. And then I'll gradually, go old watching TV, and I'll buy my tombstone for $50,000, and that'll be it. And that will be a life well lived. Okay, so he's kind of having a laugh there. He said, was this a game you want to play? There might be meaning in that for you, but consider it. So he says, when I got older, when I opened my eyes and saw the real world, I began to laugh, and I haven't stopped since. I saw that the meaning of life was to get a livelihood. The goal of life was to be a high court judge. The bright joy of love was to marry a well-off girl. That the blessing of friendship was to help each other out in a financially tight spot. That wisdom was what the majority says it was. It's solid, okay? Wisdom was what the majority says it was. That passion was to give a speech. That courage was to risk being fined $10. That cordiality was to say you're welcome after a meal. And here's another good one. And that the fear of God was to go to communion once a year. Okay, does that make you truly a religious person? He says, that is what I saw, and I laughed. Okay, that's great. So the present age and the revolutionary age. Stick with me, okay, guys? I know I'm stretching it thin here, but stick with me just for a few more minutes. So he's going to make this distinction between this present age and the revolutionary age, and he's going to give a bunch of adjectives. Okay, the present age is an age of passiveness. It's an age of anticipators. It's an age of spectators. It's an age of laziness. And what he calls the revolutionary age is an age of passion. It's an age of achievers. It's an age of audacity and ambition and exploration. Okay. And then you can ask the question, there's kind of two questions you can ask. You say, well, are we in the present age or are we in the revolutionary age? As a kind of a sociological analysis. Based on his definition of what he's talking about, the present age and the revolutionary age. And that's what I want you to retain, those two definitions. Which one are we in? But I think preferably the question to ask is, which one am I in? Okay, because if you ask it at a sociological level, you're not really going to get an answer. In some sense, humanity nowadays we're on the cutting edge of the revolutionary age. And there's a whole other chunk of the population which is deep, deep, deep in what he would call the present age. Both possibilities are well and alive. Okay, so we can get into a kind of a discussion and debate as to which one we're in as a society, but more appropriately would be to ask the question of yourself. Where do I stand with regards to this distinction? Am I a present age or am I the revolutionary age? Okay, so let's go through this quickly. And I want you to retain that distinction, the present age and the revolutionary age. The present age is an age that is devoid of passion. It flies into enthusiasm for a moment, only to decline back into indolence, into laziness. The revolutionary age runs out of control, whereas the present age does not run at all. It's he says nothing happens in this generation. There's a lot of hype, there's a lot of publicity, there's a lot of advertisement, but nothing truly happens in the present age. So he's going to talk about the media as well, and we can ask ourselves, maybe this is more appropriate now in our day and age than when he wrote it. This text, the present age, is more applicable to our present age than his present age when he wrote it, 150 years ago in Copenhagen. So he says, what this generation does is, let me just read it. From a flood of indications, one might think that either something extraordinary happened or something extraordinary was just about to happen. But we will all have thought wrong, for indications are the only things that the present age achieves. Its skill and virtuosity consists entirely of building magical illusions. Okay, hype. Okay, if a good example is, if you haven't seen the film Fire Festival, watch the film Fire Festival. Okay, it's all hype. It's all FOMO. It's all selfies. It's all presenting yourself on social media as something that you're not. Okay, it's everybody's obsessed with getting likes. Everybody's obsessed with having more and more and more friends. Everybody's obsessed with their own self-image. Okay, so there's an element of truth there. Let me give you this story. This is a story that he tells about a treasure in the middle of a frozen lake. Okay, he says, in the revolutionary age, people would acknowledge that there's a treasure there, and some audacious and courageous people would go out and they would skate out onto the thin ice to obtain this treasure. The treasure symbolizing some kind of boon, something which is good for us, something which is going to augment our life. Okay, is going to make us progress. In the revolutionary age, people will be there and they will watch this and they will applaud this person for their audacity to go out and get the treasure. Even if this person breaks through the ice and drowns and dies, they will be regarded as a hero. Okay. Now, what would happen in the present age? In the present age, nobody looks at the treasure because we say, well, we already have everything. We are perfect as we are. We are already too good. So what treasure? So anybody that looks at the treasure and seeks to obtain it is kind of ridiculed. And anybody that skates out onto the thin ice to get the treasure is kind of laughed at. And people get their cell phones out and they start filming this individual who's skating out onto the thin ice to get the treasure in the middle of the lake. But they're filming him not because they are sort of enamored by his audacity and his courage. They're filming him because they want to maybe watch him break through the ice and drown, so they can upload it on YouTube and have a good laugh at how stupid he is. Okay. Oh, look at this idiot. So that's actually a kind of a reoccurring theme. There's what's his name? Joseph Campbell, who's a scholar of mythology, that talks about the hero's journey. He says the hero's journey is an archetype that you can find in basically any culture, has some variation of the hero's journey. And the hero's journey is exactly that. Okay, it's like Plato's cave. You leave Plato's cave to return with something that is beneficial. The hero leaves society, and as he's leaving, he's sort of ridiculed. He's mocked. And upon his return, when he returns, if he does return alive with something that is beneficial for society, only then is he applauded. Okay, so the sort of the present age. The revolutionary age is an age of action. The present age is an age of advertisement. It is an age of publicity. Nothing happens, but there's instant publicity about it. That's pretty solid. Okay. There's a lot of excitement, about even political matters, environmental matters. Oh, let's have a big protest. I attended the protest. Let's have a big protest. Oh no, it's 30,000, it's 40, it's 50,000 people. Wow, it's so exciting. Did anything change? No, not really. It's a kind of a spectacle. I wish it would have changed something. And I'm not saying that there are real issues. Okay. But we do that even kind of with, Facebook and all that stuff. Oh, Joseph Kony, warlord, we got to go and arrest him. All this hype. And then it fades away. Because what matters more is the hype rather than the real thing. Okay. Let me go off on a little bit of a tangent here. Okay. Nobody cares about you. Okay. Nobody cares. And the same thing for me. Okay. People are overly obsessed with themselves. People are obsessed. They track how quickly they're getting likes and how quickly, they're being retweeted and how many times they've been viewed. Their self-worth is dependent on how many times their story, Instagram story has been viewed and so on. Nobody cares about you. You are invisible. Okay. Same thing for me. Okay. The sooner you appreciate that, the sooner you may get to living an authentic life and figuring out what is meaningful for you. Okay, sort of a big distraction. Let me skip over. Let's get to the point here. Let's get so marketing. Marketing, targeted advertisement, brands. Okay, you want to appear a certain way. this is something that I'm going to come back to. Okay, Nietzsche says there's two possibilities for mankind. Let me conclude in 2 minutes. Okay, I promise. I know I'm keeping you to the very last second. Nietzsche talks about two possibilities for mankind. What he calls the Übermensch, this worldly being, this person who's happy to be alive, is not even concerned with the afterlife. Is not concerned. Heaven is on earth. The person who is adaptable, a person who embraces everything about life. Okay, the good and the bad, the beautiful and the sorrowful. That's one possibility for human evolution. Okay, Nietzsche says mankind is a bridge between at least two possibilities. What he calls the Übermensch, the overman. Okay, the man that the human species which transcends what we are now. Okay, or the other possibility is what he calls the last man. Last man is basically a couch potato. He's content. Okay, the last man says we have discovered happiness, and he goes on blinking like an idiot. Okay. He's not curious. He's not audacious. He's not pushing his boundaries. He's not growing. He's not, seeking out his limitations and pushing them. Okay. So he says, this lazy mass, which understands nothing and does nothing, this public gallery seeks some distraction and soon gives itself over to the idea that everything which one does or achieves has been done to provide the public with something to gossip about, is the media. And we have a lot about that. This is, if you want to, for the artwork assignment, you could choose this artist. This artist is a Polish artist whose name is Paweł Kuczynski. And he has a lot of these very ironic sort of black comedy, social commentary cartoons here. So it kind of, we're all, the door is open and you can live this life. But what we end up doing is we end up kind of this distraction in this form of social media. Okay, we're always looking out and we're always trying to present a version of ourselves, and we're always looking at versions of other people as they are presenting themselves. Obsessed with that, obsessed with how many times is my thing being viewed. Nobody cares about your selfie with the Eiffel Tower. There are thousands of selfies that are being taken with the Eiffel Tower every single day. Okay, that's not what matters in this world. So let me just conclude here. Okay, thank you for your patience. I'm going to conclude in just a minute here. So this is a quote, "Paradox of our age," from the Dalai Lama. We can ask ourselves whether we agree with this in part or disagree with it in part or not. Now, Kierkegaard is talking about the present age, and here we have the paradox of our age. So I'm just kind of throwing this out there, whether or not you agree with it or not. I think I agree with some parts here. I disagree with some other parts. Let me just read it, and then we'll conclude. So we have bigger houses but smaller families, more conveniences but less time. We have more degrees but less sense, more knowledge but less judgment, more experts but more problems, more medicine but less healthiness. We've been all the way to the moon and back, but have trouble crossing the street to meet the new neighbor. We built more computers to hold more information, to produce more copies than ever, but have lost communication. We have been long on quantity but short on quality. These are times of fast food but slow digestion, tall man but short character, steep profits but shallow relationships. And this is the last line I really like. It is time when there is much in the window but nothing in the room. Okay, like a facade. What's the real content here in this person, in this individual? Okay, and what's the facade? Okay, so that's it, guys. Let me know if you have any questions or comments with regards to that. Let me just stop the sharing here. Any questions, comments before we conclude? Thank you very much.